Big night for Team Trump in the primaries. Tom Massie goes down in Kentucky, and Trump endorses Ken Paxton in the Senate primary. We've got it all. Andrew Giuliani and Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin are here. Welcome to the Sean Spicer Show. Let's get into it. All right, guys, good Wednesday to you. We've made it over halfway through the work week. A big night last night, a huge night for Team Trump throughout the country. Georgia, Alabama, Kentucky, Texas. Well, Texas was just a big night in general. I'm going to break it all down for you. Today, though, we have a huge show. Andrew Giuliani is leading the effort in the United States on this upcoming FIFA soccer tournament that's going to get played all over the place. There are a lot of questions about ticket prices, security, and we'll obviously get to how his dad is doing. So a lot to get to with him. And then Senator Ron Johnson, always a favorite of mine to get on the show. He's really got the FDA in its sights. We're going to break that all down with him. First, let me kind of break down where we are with the election. Before I get to the results, though, obviously a big additional political breaking story in Texas. Donald Trump getting in a week out from the Texas primary by endorsing Ken Paxton. Now, I was told, if you remember, right after that Texas primary, Cornyn thought that this was all his. And then the Paxton folks played this thing beautifully and said, I'll tell you what, I'll drop out if we can get the Save America Act passed. Putting a lot of pressure on Cornyn and the Senate to get stuff done. That came up short. He knew that. I think this was a real interesting game of checkers. And if you don't remember that move, I'm going to tell you, looking back on this, that was a critical statement by Ken Paxton, the current attorney general, to keep Trump on the sidelines and continuing to fight. What happened in the interim? A lot of polls showing that the narrative that Team Cornyn was spinning, that Cornyn was going to be the easy favorite to beat Tallarico and that Paxton couldn't win, fell apart real quick. Paxton continuing to make that pressure on Trump that he had been with him forever, and he had. And that Cornyn had been weak in his support for Trump over the years. That finally came through. And remember, there's a lot of key players in Trump's orbit that were on Team Cornyn. Chris LaCivita, obviously the biggest name that's supporting Cornyn. And so that overcame a lot. He put out a truth statement last night saying that while Ken Paxton's a real nice guy, a good guy is his exact quote, that he was going to get behind Ken Paxton. I got to tell you right now, and what I heard from a lot of the Team Cornyn folks is they thought that if Trump had stayed out of this thing, that they had a real good shot of winning. I don't agree with that at all. I think this was Ken Paxton's. I think the president knew that, and he wanted to be on the right side of the win ahead of the primary. But as far as I'm concerned now, that race is over. Ken Paxton will coast to victory with the president's support. But there was some big other proof that the president's endorsement was huge last night. Tom Massie, that congressman in Western Kentucky that the president has gone after, he lost big time to the president's choice of Ed Gallerin last night, former Navy SEAL. When all is said and done, it will be the most expensive primary in U.S. history. And Ed Gallerin will go to the general election as obviously the huge favorite, having beaten Tom Massie by over 10 points. This was huge, a huge embarrassment. Tom Massie conceded the race. Take a listen to him.
I would have come out sooner, but I had to call my opponent and concede, and it took a while to find Ed Gallerin in Tel Aviv. I did get the call through, though. I have called and conceded the race. We've been honorable the whole time, and we're going to stay that way. You know, welcome to the most expensive congressional primary ever in the 250-year history of this country. It's not just the most expensive. This thing went on longer than Vietnam.
You get the hint, but Massie at least conceded. I hope he stays true to his word, because Bill Cassidy, who got his butt handed to him in the Louisiana primary over the weekend, already started to take it out. He voted with the Democrats yesterday on the War Powers resolution in the Senate. So hopefully Massie stays true to his word and goes out on a classy note, not trying to seek a revenge. In other primary news, Mike Collins in Georgia advanced to the runoff in Georgia for the Senate race. He will be joined by Derek Dooley, who edged out Congressman Buddy Carter for the second place slot in that runoff. A lot of big issues. Brian Kemp's chosen candidate to be governor, the former secretary or the current secretary of state, Brad Raffensperger, didn't even make the runoff. It was a big night, as I said, for Trump candidates up and down the ballot around the states in Alabama, Georgia, you name it. And in Pennsylvania, a bit of a mixed bag for the Democrats. We'll break that all down as we get closer and closer. But the other big news yesterday is J.D. Vance was taken to the podium. He came out in phenomenal fashion. Take a listen.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. How you guys doing? Good. Okay, I've got my cheat sheet here, so I know who to call on. Most importantly, who not to call on. Let me start out with a few things. So first of all,
well, I wish I had known there was a cheat sheet, who not to call on. I tweeted that out to the vice president last night. Someone should have told me about that, but he did a great job. He was funny. He was gregarious, very informative. He challenged some of these reporters. Didn't probably get the attention that the Marco Rubio press conference did because there was so much else going on in the world of politics, but a great job by the vice president. Anyway, I love the way he approached that. He did some sparring with the reporters. He was funny in a bunch of other places. But anyway, a great show headed your way. As I mentioned, Andrew Giuliani's coming up. He's going to talk to us about his dad in the FIFA tournament, and then Senator Ron Johnson. So we got a great thing. Tomorrow, an unbelievable panel coming your way. Mike Slater, my colleague here on the First Television Network, Grace Curley, and Ashley Brassfield from the Daily Caller will all join us. And then on Friday, a real interesting look at UFOs. This has become a big deal. Tim Burchett and others making a big deal out of this with Jessica Reed Krause. And Kent Heckenlively will also join us to talk about what we need to know that the government is hiding on UFOs. I find this thing fascinating, and I want to bring you into this discussion. So without further ado, I want to bring in the executive director of the White House Task Force for FIFA's World Cup in 2026, Andrew Giuliani. Andrew, good to see you. I want to get to this whole FIFA thing, but before I do that, just give us an update. How's your dad doing?
He's doing great, Sean. Thank you for asking. 2 weeks ago, he was receiving his last rites at one point, and right when I got down to the hospital, and I was just with him on Saturday this last week, and I got to tell you, it seems like he's basically back to normal, 90%. He was outside. We ended up having dinner out. He's feeling great. So it's the guy is tough as nails, and I'm so proud of him, Sean.
I mean, honestly, I remember stopping and saying a prayer because I remember that's what he asked for. That's what you guys asked for. But like last rites, and now to hear that he's back up and around, a couple days later, that's amazing.
It's miraculous. And I know he talks about it, and I don't want to put words in his mouth right there, but he talks about it, his experience there and going up to what he thought was St. Peter and seeing his oldest and dearest friend who's passed on for about 10 years now, saying that don't worry about it, I'll get you in, but it's not your time. And so it just it makes you think that there is something greater than this, Sean. So yeah.
I do want to ask you one thing, because he said that you recorded a recollection of, quote, a very significant spiritual experience. I mean, so you've recorded this.
Yeah, I was taking notes down as he was telling me about this, and it really, I don't want to say it's renewed my faith, but it's made me realize that again, that there is something far greater that we're on earth here for. So it was miraculous to then hear the priest there talk about kind of, purgatory. What is purgatory? The idea that time is one of the most valuable commodities that we have here on earth, and maybe that's one of the great gifts of heaven, is that time is endless, if you will. Yeah. And it's one of the great gifts that we're given here. It was truly amazing to hear it.
I mean, honestly, it does renew your faith. I'm glad you said it that way, because when you hear people have those close to death experiences and they walk away thinking, wow, I know what's coming. I know what I'm looking forward to, but also you have a renewed sense of like how much time you have left on earth to get yourself square with God.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly right. I think I had somebody once tell me, a Monsignor once tell me, the best way to think about us on earth, thinking of heaven, is like a child in the womb who, they know the womb, they know they're comfortable. They could have no idea of what is coming for them, the beauties of the earth that they're going to ultimately experience once they're born and throughout their lives. And that's kind of what we are like on earth now, waiting to go to our eternal resting place one day. We just can't have any concept of what eventually is waiting for us. So.
All right, well, then let's get to the business at hand. I'm glad that he's doing well and out and about. I'm sure you're excited to spend Father's Day with him, especially now. I hope you got a good gift this year, Andrew, because I think this is one where just having his presence around is probably the greatest gift that you can have. But God definitely blessed him with some additional time on this earth. Let me ask you, as we get into this FIFA thing, the Democrats got away with closing down the government for 76 days, I think it was. And obviously, when you do that, there are consequences. I kept echoing that to people, that there are things that you don't see, preparations and missions and training. And so I say all that because what effect did the DHS shutdown have on the planning and the security required for something so huge as this FIFA soccer tournament?
Yeah, Sean, you're absolutely right. And I think, one of the things that people were confronted with on a daily basis were TSA workers, right? And thinking about how this is going to be one of the largest travel summers, if not the largest in our country's history, not just with the World Cup, but with Freedom 250, with all the amazing events around our semi-quincentennial. You think about all the travel that's going to ultimately happen there. Any TSA worker who ultimately quit, we do not have time to get them trained up. And that's why bringing in ICE agents into airports was something that was essential and something that I know the president realized would be a way to ultimately help take the burden off of TSA and bring them closer into the actual areas. Some of the planning had to move rightward because it did not support an immediate protection against loss of life. But one of the things that we tried to do as a task force was make the case on a daily basis that if these plans are not made now, they're not going to happen, and they could lead to an essential loss of life at some point. So in spite of the Democratic shutdown, in spite of what's happened with TSA, I would say that we are prepared, but it took a full push from the entire federal government, and frankly, offloading some of the planning onto the Department of War and dealing from a health perspective with the Health and Human Services and trying to figure out creative ways that it was not just the Department of Homeland Security that was exclusively doing this. And I think that's one of the unique places that we sit here as an interagency task force, where you have 8 different agencies working here. Even though we're funded out of the Department of Homeland Security, we were able to figure out some ways around it, understanding that we need to get the country prepared for this World Cup. Otherwise, we would not be prepared. So,
Andrew, when the Super Bowl happens, they designate it as a national security event, and Secret Service comes in and all that. You've got these FIFA games getting played all over the country at different stadiums. What level of security are they going to be at, and are you getting the support you need?
Yeah, so Sean, I think the best way to put it is, for the United States of America, this is like 78 Super Bowls in 39 days. In terms of the setup, both from counter UAS, we're using the exact same counter UAS protocols that they would use as a Super Bowl, as well as the surrounding areas there. You think about Foxborough, considering that's your home stadium there. We will be utilizing the exact same. I know Foxborough is one of the few that has not hosted a Super Bowl, but basically the perimeters will be extended out even more than they would have for the AFC Championship game this year or major Patriot playoff games. We'll be using the same perimeters that they used in San Francisco for the Super Bowl this year. Same thing in Los Angeles. Same thing for the New Jersey State Troopers. One example that I like to give is for the New Jersey State Troopers, you'll generally, for an NFL game, have 150 to 170 Jersey State Troopers on. For this World Cup, it'll be 450, a minimum of 450 Jersey State Troopers. For the Super Bowl they hosted back in 2012, it was 360. So we're plussing up even from a Super Bowl. The thing that makes it truly unique is for a Super Bowl, you have the whole federal government come on in, basically prepare for weeks. They come on into the area for 1 week, and then you tear down the circus, and you don't have to worry about your next thing until maybe your joint address or your State of the Union to Congress. Some days you'll have 6 World Cup games followed by another 6 on top of what's going on from Sailforth 250, Freedom 250, all the other events. So really, we're relying not just on our federal partners here, but also on our state and local partners because this is a whole of continent approach over the course of 40 days.
And so you mentioned 8 interagency groups that you work with. Obviously, Department of War. You mentioned one of them, the HHS. What I know there are some health scares out there that have occurred. What are you guys doing to coordinate with HHS and the CDC to make sure that we don't have to worry about people from other countries coming in, bringing disease, affecting us, et cetera?
Yeah, I think the thing that I can tell the American people is that HHS and the White House are leaning in on this. We are being extremely proactive to monitor any health crises that may be going on in other parts of the world, understanding that whether you're a player or a fan, there are going to be no waivers if there has been any contact to any communicable diseases here. There is going to be absolutely no compromising national security and our health for this, whether or not you're a star player for the team or whether you're a fan in there. So we are leaning in on this. This is going right to the very top of the White House on this, and we are working directly with the CDC to make sure that we are doing the proper contact tracing so that way there is no risk at all of bringing any potential communicable diseases to the United States of America for this tournament.
We saw the hantavirus on that cruise ship. We're hearing stories about Ebola. So is it that we're making sure that they get screened as they come into the country, or stopping them before they take off?
Stopping them before they take off. There will be contact tracing. We will make sure that we do the full 21 days of where they've been, that anybody will be quarantining there. And for fans, it will be even longer than that. So the president just issued a Title 42 here saying that anybody who has been in the DRC and Uganda over the last, basically it's a 30-day issuance that they cannot come into the United States of America. We'll be abiding by that. There is a chance that does get extended. So we're working, again, like I said, at the top of the administration and with the CDC and Health and Human Services to make sure that, if anything, we are more careful on this. We want to make sure, again, that that there's no opportunity to spread anything that's as risky as this.
So for a lot of Americans, they're excited about these FIFA games. I'm included. I entered the lottery for tickets. We can just say this I did not even try to call Andrew Giuliani for tickets to FIFA. Not sure that would have mattered, but I think for a lot of people, they're shocked at the ticker price. And the president himself addressed this the other day. What do you say about this? I mean, I know FIFA is FIFA, but we're financing part of this as a U.S. government, as you mentioned, this whole government approach. All of the security ticket prices are upwards of $1,000. They're talking about New Jersey was excited that they're only charging $100 to get on the bus to go, which is a pretty steep price. I mean, the cost is a big issue for this.
Yeah, I think, and one of the things that we've done, and we've leaned in with New York, New Jersey to make sure that there is a reasonable priced way to get to the stadium. So now they've recently announced, after we had some conversations with New York and New Jersey, a $20 round trip bus fare. So that way they can get from the Port Authority to the stadium at a reasonable cost. And one of the reasons is because the federal government ended up issuing a $100 million transportation grant where $10.4 million went to New York, New Jersey. Sean, if you end up doing the math on that, $10.4 million over 8 games at, let's say, 40,000 riders per game. That's kind of the upward echelons of what you would expect to travel there. That's over $31 per ticket. If you were to take round trip travel, let's say for a Giant or Jet game to the Meadowlands from Penn Station, it would cost you $12.90, $13. So the federal government has basically subsidized the normal cost at 2.5 times that. So we wanted to make sure that at least the fans had a reasonable cost to get to the stadium, understanding that, it was not tenable to have $100 ticket prices there to go around trip. In terms of the ticket costs, look, I agree with the president, and the president spoke directly to the president of FIFA on this. Prices are high. I think one of the things that we've looked at and one of the reasons why prices are high is because there is such a demand to come to the United States of America for when you add the FIFA World Cup with the leadership of President Donald J. Trump, you get this major demand here in our golden age of America, this golden age of sports. And so because of that, you've had over 500 million ticket requests for what is 7 million tickets. That's just going to drive the costs very high. We are working with FIFA to make sure that some of our greatest American heroes, some Gold Star families, some Medal of Honor recipients have the opportunity to be able to enjoy World Cup games right there. But we've also looked and said, hey, as a federal government, issuing price controls is probably one thing that we want to be very, very careful of when we end up going and looking at private entities here. So
Okay.
I would say the president's a bit of a victim of his own success on this one, in the sense that people want to come to the United States of America to be able to enjoy what we have here, especially when it's when a World Cup is at stake.
All right. Well, Andrew, I appreciate all the work that you're doing to help plan this to make sure it's safe, both from a health standpoint and from a security standpoint. I look forward to going to the games. And again, if you get extras, you know where you can call. Just let me know. I'll take them off your hand. But I appreciate all of your hard work. I'm glad to hear your dad's doing well, and I appreciate you joining us.
Thank you, Sean, and thank you for all your prayers and all your viewers' prayers as well. They made a difference, and as always, thank you for your friendship.
Well, you're very welcome, and wish your dad a very happy Father's Day. I'm sure you're excited for this one in particular. So thanks a lot.
Thank you, Sean.
You bet. Great conversation with Andrew. Unbelievable. Now I want to break down everything that's going on with these primaries and some of the stuff that's happening with the FDA with our good buddy, Senator from Wisconsin, Ron Johnson.
I think you're aware of the fact that I, on many fronts, think our response to the pandemic was a miserable failure. I'm also well aware that because the pandemic's over, so many people just want to put it behind us. Let's not examine all the things that went wrong. One group of people who do not want to move on, one group of people that insist on a reckoning, are those who were injured by the COVID mRNA injection. I think you're aware of the fact that on VAERS today, worldwide, we have almost 1.7 million reports of adverse events, almost 39,000 deaths. By the way, of those deaths, 24% occurred either on the day of injection or within 1 or 2 days. Now, I know VAERS doesn't prove causation, but man, that's a correlation.
Senator, great to see you again. I got to ask you, I know you've been going hardcore in your committee on what's going on at the FDA, but before we even get into what you guys are hearing and what you have discovered and are getting at in this hearing, where do you think things stand right now at the FDA in terms of its leadership? I know the president, depending on how you read the situation, either just relieved or Marty Makary, the director or administrator, stood down.
I have no idea. The one I was probably most disappointed to hear was Tracy Beth Hogue, who
yes,
I've talked to in the past. I mean, she was definitely was supportive of what I was trying to do in terms of uncover the truth. So again, I literally have no idea. I've written an oversight letter to Bobby Kennedy asking for a meeting to gather his HHS team so that we can speed up the discovery process. But
I guess the larger question I'm getting is: are you concerned that right now that we don't have a full-time leader? Do you have a candidate in mind? Were you pleased with the status of where things were at the FDA before, or are you more hopeful now? I mean, I'm just trying to get a sense of, was the leadership the problem, or were they working with you?
Well, when it came to rare diseases, Marty Makary kept saying all the right things, but then he was also proud of the fact that he wasn't overruling his career staff. They were denying some of these treatments to Duchenne muscular dystrophy patients, ataxia, Sanfilippo syndrome, which made no sense to me. Again, the whole point, I was the champion right to try, is because of President Trump's leadership forced the House to pass that bill. She only one had a chance. President Trump is completely on board with the American public having the right to try these things, and yet within the FDA, you just couldn't get them out of their mode of just saying no. So I couldn't understand that. But on the other hand, I know that there's real resistance within the FDA, within HHS, of being transparent to the public in terms of what happened during COVID, in terms of vaccine injuries, that type of thing. So, again, as Bobby Kennedy, his commitment to radical transparency kind of broke that logjam, forced them to turn over 11 million pages. 11 million pages. And my staff has been fabulous at picking needles out of the haystack to uncover what I think is probably the greatest political scandal in American history in terms of federal health agencies.
I heard the same thing you did about how McCary would say the right things and the career staff would not go along, or they would overrule them or whatever. Do you just think that that's a function of big pharma having too much influence, or is that just, see, I think that this is where this all comes down.
Yes. No, I think big pharma literally controls everything when it comes to medicine now. I mean, they fund medical colleges, they fund medical journals. The 1992 regulation that allowed them to advertise, they control the narrative. Now, I've said this in the past. If you watch an ad for drugs on TV, first of all, if you're a sales guy, there's no way you would ever put an ad like that on TV. It doesn't describe even what condition it's being used for. I guess maybe it shows you how to have your dog catch a Frisbee. But then if you actually listen to the adverse events, there's no way you would ever take that drug. So why would they put an ad like that on TV? There's only one reason: spend billions of dollars to control the narrative. There used to be some real journalism when it comes to childhood vaccine injuries. That was before that 1992 act. There have been some reports, but the narrative of safe and effective has so overwhelmed the very few reports since 1992 of journalism seriously looking at childhood vaccine injuries. And of course, I was vilified, ridiculed. People that had me on, they were deplatformed when I started raising the issue of the COVID injection injuries.
In my latest book, I have a chapter on MAHA and what's going on at the FDA. Since 1981, 10 of the last FDA administrators that have served there have gone on to big pharma, except David Kessler, who went in academia. I'm not generally a person that wants to have the government regulate things, but would you be open to the idea of FDA commissioners having a cooling off period where senior leaders couldn't go into big pharma for, say, 5 years and then re-regulate?
I think people in senior positions in the federal health agencies ought to be barred, because you just have this revolving door. James O'Keefe with his undercover video, some guy just bragging about that revolving door. And no, it's a huge scandal. I mean, Peter Marks, who's at the head, the pinnacle of this scandal that hopefully we'll start talking about, he went on to greener pastures at Eli Lilly. So no, this is an incestuous and a very corrupt process is going on right now. The circularity between HHS officials and big pharma.
I want to get to that one last question, though, because I think the other thing that I was fascinated by, and you mentioned this in the commercials, is that it's not just the commercials that are sort of funding a lot of the broadcast media, but also when you look at like outlets like Axios and Political and Notice, right, that are the DC tip sheets. Here's what everybody's reading. They're funded by big pharma. And so the question I have is, you mentioned the media and the corruptness in it. And of course, they're not going to cover it if their salaries, they spent $10.8 billion in media ads last year. And I just don't know how you ever think journalism is going to cover something when they're literally financing their own salaries.
It doesn't. And we have proof. Now we have proof. So can I tell you what we uncovered in those 11 million pages?
Yeah, I want to hear this.
So on March 1st of 2021, this is less than 3 months from the administration, the approval of, and the administration of the COVID injections. They're not vaccines, they're injections. It's gene therapy. Peter Marks, the head of CBER, the division that approves vaccines, and then once approved is supposed to follow and surveil the safety of those vaccines, was warned, was given a briefing, multi-page briefing by their data mining expert, Dr. Anna Scharfman, that the current algorithm they were using to analyze VAERS was going to hide and was masking safety signals. So he was warned. 26 days later, Dr. Scharfman, working with the inventor of that current algorithm, developed a new one and presented to senior FDA officials the fact that the old system had masked, extreme masking on 49 different safety signals or adverse events, And they were now revealing 25 serious safety signals on things like sudden cardiac death, pulmonary infarction, Bell's palsy, different types of strokes. Dr. Scharsman, working with that inventor 3 months in a row, continued to provide them data showing more safety signals on more types of different types of sudden death. Instead of pinning a badge on her chest, they shunted her off to the side. They literally told her to cease and desist. We've got the documents. We've got the emails where this is being talked about here. So Peter Marks knew the algorithm they were going to use, that they were using, was masking signals. He saw the signals, and yet they continued to use that old algorithm, so they could go to the American public and say, we're just not seeing safety signals. I ran a minute clip in our hearing where we issued this report of Peter Marks talking to the injection injured people they were treating, diagnosed with very debilitating vaccine or injection injuries, kept telling these guys, we're not denying these, but we're just not seeing safety signals. They're saying
Peter
that
Marks,
today.
Peter Marks left government service, correct?
Yeah, he's working at Eli Lilly now.
Oh, because I wanted to get to this, but this is where I wanted to tie these questions together. I mean, this is what I was asking. Here's a guy who literally goes and does everything you just described and then ends up, at Eli Lilly, one of the big pharma companies. I mean, I guess the question is, do you think that this was him doing their bidding to try to get the job there? Did they have undue influence? I'm just trying to figure out whether this was him knowing that this is where he wanted to end up, because there's a lot of questions about where some of these FDA, whether they go to Johnson & Johnson or whatever. We'll see where certain people end up now. But I do wonder if they're doing the bidding while they're there to try to get the job, or if they're being paid off while they're there.
Well, they do the bidding of Big Pharma to approve these injections or these vaccines. Okay, that's when they're doing the bidding. Once they've approved them, I mean, if you're the person that approved thalidomide that resulted in all these birth defects, would you want to admit it? So once they've approved these childhood vaccines, and again, read Vaccines on Men by Aaron Siri to show how very underpowered, how literally we've never, ever tested a childhood vaccine against a true placebo. So just read that. But then you'll also understand how after these things have been approved, nobody wants to see safety signals. Nobody wants to see adverse events. Nobody wants to admit to them. And so I think that's really what happened. Of course, every day that went by where they wouldn't admit to these adverse events, every day that went by where they lied that we're just not seeing safety signals, even though safety signals were screaming at them. Sean, I've got a chart. Goes back to 1990, at the beginning of VAERS. On average, about 280 deaths per year associated with the vaccines are reported to VAERS. Anaphylactic shock, that type of thing. 2021, 21,000 deaths worldwide. And you're saying you're not seeing safety signals? Now, when I put that up there, I go, well, yeah, you have to consider the number of doses. Okay, let's take a look at it on a per dose basis. For the COVID injections, this is a calculation we did in 2023, 25.5 deaths per million doses reported to VAERS. For the flu vaccine, 0.46. So it's a 55-fold increase. Again, I didn't need a sophisticated algorithm to tell me these safety signals were screaming at everybody. And to this day, these regulators, these people continue to deny what we just didn't see safety signals because they used an algorithm purposely so they wouldn't see them.
But they didn't. It's not that they wouldn't see them, right? They chose not to see them. They
Right,
chose to
precisely.
cover it up. So when you guys start pursuing this in your committee and you're going after this, how worried was the FDA when they started getting these freedom of information requests from you and your team?
Well, that's on a report. And one of the things they did, they got freedom of information requests from about 3 different people around the same period of time. They stopped issuing their internal report between FDA and CDC. Again, you don't want to put things in writing. By the way, it was my staff that pulled the needle of the haystack on Dr. David Morens. Now, not from information we got from HHS, from a 115,000-page document production from a university in Texas. They picked up that email that showed Dr. David Morens saying, I've got this FOIA lady who showed me how to make emails disappear. If you want to send me something sensitive, send it to me in Gmail. Now, we report that immediately to the Inspector General of HHS under Biden. They did nothing. It took Trump's Inspector General or that office under Trump about a year and a half to finally look at that. And now they've indicted David Morans for conspiracy and destruction of federal records. But we see very similar types of statements in our report saying, well, this is pretty sensitive. Let's not put that in an email. So again, we got the documents now. We've got documented proof. Now we begin the interviews. And you can't really interview people if you don't have documents, because what do you ask them? They just deny everything. So, but now that we have documents, now we can ask them very pointed questions. What did you mean by this? What did you want to discuss, or what did you discuss that you weren't willing to put in an email?
And so as you do this, because you guys have issued this huge report, it's completely available for the media, for the public to do this. What level of interest have you seen?
So again, people like you on podcasts, I'm doing a bunch of these. People have been on top of this but the mainstream media, and I'm calling them out for it too. I mean, I'm on Jake Tapper, and literally while I'm waiting for the interview, I'm texting him the report. And so I get on there. He's talking about one thing. So, well, Jake, what I really want to talk about is this. I just sent you the report, but read it and have me back on. Has invited me back on. I've called out CBS, NBC, ABC, PBS, MS Now. None of them are touching this.
But don't you think this gets to my money question, right? So if you're Tapper, and I don't know how much money CNN gets, but I did document how much ABC and CBS, don't you think that these guys realize that, hey, I got to be careful here. There's stories over and over again about news outlets basically putting the kibosh on anything that deals with big pharma, because they realize this is their sugar daddy. This is who pays their salaries.
That's why they spent the billions of dollars. Yes, that's exactly what's happening. And fortunately, I'm in a position where I have somewhat of a platform to keep pointing this out, but it hasn't got me on these shows yet. I mean, this has only been 3 weeks since we had that hearing and we issued that report. It's radio silence. I'm sending this to reporters I know. Highly disappointed that some of these people that I would think would write about this at least haven't done so.
And what about like RFK? Like, what is when you expose all this? Because again, the idea that they're literally making plans to say, let me explain how you need to communicate with me because we got to keep this away from the FOIA lady. What is the political leadership at HHS responded?
Well, Bobby Kennedy, everything I've communicated with him, he's really appreciative of what I'm doing. He really thinks I'm doing a great job. Let's be honest. They're working for a man who wants to believe the COVID injection, Operation Warp Speed, saved tens of millions of lives. That's part of the problem. So, there's a great deal of pressure, I'm sure, within HHS. I mean, look at these other things. And by the way, there's tons of other things to look at. MAHA is basically food, right? And then it's kind of, big pharma and vaccines and childhood vaccine injuries, that type of thing. It's really kind of two components to MAHA. You can do just about all those things, President Trump, and I appreciate it. He's very supportive of that. But when it comes to Operation Warp Speed and the COVID injection, that's going to be kind of up to me to bring this to the fore.
And what about your colleagues? You have this hearing. I know sometimes I watch these hearings and it's the chairman and maybe the ranking member. Is there any interest among your colleagues to say, wow, I didn't know this, I want to learn more? Or is it, hey, I've gotten a lot of campaign contributions from these guys, we got to be careful?
No, I think it's far more the fact, and this is across the board. No, there's very little interest because doctors push this on their patients. The federal health agencies obviously push on their patients. President Trump certainly wants to be proud of the lives that might have been saved by the COVID injection. We've got members of Congress who cut videos. Get that job, end the pandemic, right? I mean, so society-wide, globally, there were so many people pushing this injection on everybody. If you're a doctor, you don't want to believe that something you recommended or really twisted an arm of a patient to take killed him. And that happened. Again, 39,000 deaths reported worldwide. According to a CDC commission study at Harvard, the Pilgrim study, estimate about 1% of vaccine adverse events gets reported. So there's a huge underreporting factor. But of those 39,000 deaths, 24% of them occurred on the day of vaccination or within 2 days. Now they always say, well, VAERS doesn't prove causation. Fine. But I tell you what, if a loved one of mine that I was, don't get that thing, went and got it, died in her sleep.
Or has long COVID.
I mean, I know what I'd be blaming.
But do they have, there was a whole movement about giving these guys immunity from this. I mean, don't you think that there should at least be discovery and allow people to file civil suits against them?
I think so, particularly when now we have evidence of the fraud.
Right.
I mean, Peter Marks simply can't deny that he wasn't warned. The senior FDA officials, and right now I don't know exactly who saw the runs, the run 26 days later, and then, 3 successive months after that, data runs showing more significant adverse events. That's where we have to do these interviews. Who saw this? But they were shown it. They can't deny that. We have evidence that they were made aware of this fact. So again, it'll be interesting to see whether they will voluntarily comply with interviews, whether we have to subpoena them. If when we subpoena them, do they take the fifth? Whether the Trump Justice Department will intervene and start holding people accountable. Now, unfortunately, Sean, the government protects itself. I mean, you can't sue the government virtually for no reason. Then, of course, Congress passed these laws to give all these, the companies liability protection. There's a lot of law in the book that really protects government employees working on the behalf of the people from lawsuit. So you've probably got a very narrow path in terms of how you could even civilly sue some of these individuals. What we can do, though, is expose the corruption, expose what they did. And again, let me point out, this is in March. Back then, there were only a few thousand deaths reported to VAERS. So it should have been capped at that. Remember, 1976, you probably weren't even alive back then.
I was.
I got the swine flu vaccine. I got sick from it. Okay, I was down for a couple of days. Less than 3 dozen deaths, and the swine flu vaccine was pulled from the market. We had thousands of deaths. I confronted Francis Collins in April when there were, I think, 2,926 deaths reported to VAERS. I said, Dr. Collins, are you following this? Well, Senator, we've attributed 6 deaths to the Janssen vaccine, clotting, that type of thing. But other than that, Senator, people die. That was his reaction. And that continues to be their reaction. So, well, here's what they do. There's no definitive proof. I mean, that's a weasel word. So you'll never have a definitive proof of exactly what caused somebody to, they had that heart attack. Maybe they died of a cerebral hemorrhage first, or maybe, it's like definitive. It just shows you how disingenuous they really are.
Right.
Again, 24% of 39,000 deaths reported the day of, within 2 days. I know what I would more than likely attribute the cause of death to those types, particularly when you have these reports perfectly healthy. And I've been dealing enough with the vaccine injured or the injection injured community. These are healthy people. They have no health problems whatsoever. All of a sudden they are permanently disabled, or they just died in their sleep.
Unbelievable. Senator, I don't think we'd know a fraction of what we know now if it wasn't for your efforts. So thank you and your team and your staff for bringing all this to light. Thank you for sharing it with us, because I'm glad to cover it if Jake Tapper and CNN and CBS won't.
Well, I appreciate you having me on. And by the way, you're an influential part of the media. Help me put pressure on these people.
You got it. Let's start naming names.
This has to be reported. Sean, I can't think of a bigger scandal in my lifetime, because how many people were permanently disabled or died because they hid this, because they covered it up.
Well, thanks again for your work. I really appreciate you being with us and sharing this. Come back anytime.
Thank you. Take care.
You bet. All right. What an amazing show. Thank you to Andrew, to Senator Ron Johnson. We've got a big show coming your way tomorrow. As I mentioned, an amazing panel. We'll break down a lot of this stuff, plus some of the crazy things that Democrats have been saying this week, winners and losers as always. And then Friday, I'm fascinated. This whole thing with UFO has gotten a lot of attention. We'll break it all down with you. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you back here tomorrow on the Sean Spicer Show.